We'll see the big plus of Riverside today. Anybody who's joining already, welcome to a special edition of Simulation Talk with the one and the only Dr. Andrew Gallimore. Gallimore, Goler, Laser, DMT discussion. Not a bad title. It's definitely very memeable. Let's see. I'm gonna check right now.
Okay.
Kelsey's saying something. Oh, thought it was. Okay, so let me make sure that on YouTube that everything is playing right, because if it's going to give us issues with quality in the live, then I might even just swap, and people will jump on very quickly. Don't worry, because people are used to. Okay, so right now it says streaming.
Okay, so I'm now. I've opened the Twitter space.
Awesome.
And my mic is on, so hopefully everyone can hear me. Can
Let me
someone
join
give a
also
sign?
on X. Start listening.
Yeah, check that you can hear. You should
Yeah.
ask for permission to speak as well. Can someone give a sign?
Request to speak. Perfect. And then I will mute myself.
Yeah, check that you can hear.
Can you mute
You
me?
should ask for permission to speak as well.
There we go. Perfect.
So I've added you as a speaker. You can now speak.
Okay, let me see that we're live on YouTube. We are live. Oh. It started a separate conversation. Strange. Hold on. If that is the case, then we'll just do it. We're gonna switch real quick to a different. Okay, I see us. It started a separate conversation. Okay, let me mute this. One. Everybody, we're doing this for the first time together with both X and also streaming. So thank you for your patience. Okay. So I'm going to close this. They can see us on YouTube, so that's good. Let me just title this differently. Perfect.
So why? I'm still hearing myself. I don't understand how that's possible. Maybe I've got
because it feeds because the headphones are probably feeding through the stream. So I think you still would have to and then you can hear from both. If we're talking,
my headphones are connected to my computer. So
yeah,
why am I hearing myself?
so it feed because the computer is also going from X. Or you're doing it through your phone.
The doing X through my phone.
Oh.
And I've got it silent. So why can I hear myself?
So maybe it's in settings of the Mac itself. If you go to sound and see if it actually input should be USB. Output should be...
Okay, input is my Rode mic.
Yep.
My speaker is my earphones. Maybe... Can't change anything on here.
111? 111?
It doesn't really bother me too much that...
Yeah, it doesn't bother me too much either. Okay.
But
I think we can just go like this. Can you hear me okay now?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. So I don't know why it was
wondering when everyone...
One.
Okay.
All right, everybody. I hope this doesn't bother people too much. I think we're okay. Great. We'll see if it's for next time, we'll know if it was worth it in terms of quality. I think it is, but worst comes to worst, next time I will be streaming on. I'll be streaming directly through Riverside if it actually doesn't make that much difference. But we'll find out in a moment. I want to go to do one final thing because yeah, it's really good quality actually. Okay. And they have a little bit of a delay, which is perfect because if they're on X, it will actually just unsync. Okay, awesome. Andrew, how are you, brother?
Danny, very good. How are you?
I'm doing great. As I keep repeating, is exactly what you said on the Danny Jones podcast, which is like for some reason people think we have beef. I feel like it's more in people's minds than in ours. And I also in the habit of saying I rather enjoy our disagreement because it's great because it allows for an actual conversation and growth. And for me, especially particularly considering the fact that in the domain of proper research, you're obviously uh, a lot more equipped in terms of your knowledge. It actually allows me to learn a lot through how a scientist actually views what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So I do appreciate that a lot. And to anybody who doesn't quite understand uh, why we're talking today, that's okay. All we're doing is basically exploring the newest kind of ideation around where we think we stand. We had a short conversation. Well, actually, we had a lengthy conversation, then a short conversation in LA. And as I told people on my lives, I don't know if we reached agreement, but we definitely reached clarity. And to me, that was more important than anything else, which is at least I saw that you understood a little bit more where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to do, and I appreciate your open-mindedness around the subject. So that it doesn't go without notice. So thank you for that. And
No problem. So,
yeah, go ahead.
well, I think, how do you want to structure this? I mean, I was going to kind of say a few things, kind of open up the conversation and kind of talk about what I would like to cover, and then we can, I don't know, you can say something, and then we do a bit of back and forth or something like that,
Yeah,
then
and then we
later
open it for
open up
Q&A. So
to,
that's perfect.
yeah, yeah, okay. So I guess we can start. Um, so, so I guess I'd like to start very broadly and start with what we agree on, which I think is kind of absolutely fundamental, which is that we both agree broadly that DMT allows people to interact with some kind of intelligence. Um, or at least we agree that, I never say quite definitively that I absolutely know that to be the case, but we certainly have a strong feeling that DMT allows us to interact with some kind of intelligence. And my working model, if you like, of how I think DMT works, which I explore in detail in my latest book, how I came to that conclusion, is that DMT is granting access in some way to novel information that is external to the brain, and that is directed in some way into the brain. So you're kind of giving access to your brains, your cortical world building machinery to this intelligence. And so this kind of naturally brings up the question of reality, right? That central question that applies not just to this laser code effect, but applies to all DMT imagery. The question everyone wants to know is it real? Is it real? And I think it's a very difficult question to answer because everyone has their own conception of what we mean by real. And so when you say, I think the code is real, that can be interpreted in many different ways. So what I think I'd like to do is kind of think about three ways, if you like, of thinking about reality, or thinking about the reality of the vision's experience under the influence of DMT, and this, of course, applies also to this code. So the first type of reality, which you might call non-reality or hallucination, right? So how do we define something to be a hallucination? So we define something as a hallucination that is, if you like, entirely internally generated. It's constructed by the brain. There's no external influence. There's no information against which this vision is being tested or modulated. It's entirely internally generated. So, for example, sorry, the people that can't see, if we take this, let's say I see this glass flask here. Is this glass flask real? And we can have I think there are kind of three different answers to that. The first one is, is this glass flask being modulated by some kind of external source of information? If not, if it's not being mapped to something in the external world, to an actual object or some kind of structure, then we would say this is a hallucination. This is not real. It's not a perfect definition, but I think it's a reasonable one, right? So it's entirely internally generated. The alternative is this glass flask. If my model of this glass flask being constructed by my brain is being modulated by information coming from outside. So, for example, through my eyes, I'm seeing this glass flask. Of course, the flask is always being constructed by my brain. It's always a model, whether it's hallucination or not. But if there is some information coming in from the environment that my brain is using to kind of maintain and modulate this model, then we would say that that's real, right? Does that make sense so far? So I'm not being entirely
yeah. No,
cogent, but
I'm just no,
yeah,
absolutely. I obviously have
yeah,
some ideas I want to bounce off of you, but
yeah.
absolutely full clarity. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's the most, when people say is it hallucination or is it real? That's really what they mean. Is it entirely constructed internally, or is it constructed internally, but is it being mapped in some way to something out there in the environment? And if it is, then we would say that it's real. It's not a perfect definition, but we would say that it's real. But then there's a third.
So before
A
you
third
continue, sorry,
type.
before you continue to the
Yeah.
third, people said they can't hear me on X, and I just turned when I'm going to be speaking, I'll turn my mic on, and then I'll turn it back off, and this is also as a test for everybody on YouTube to tell me if you heard everything now on X. I'm going to mute myself. Continue with number 3, please. Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
Okay. So people can, yeah. Okay. So hopefully people can hear me on X.
Oh, there you go. They said,
Yeah.
no,
So
they could hear you. They just couldn't hear me, because I muted myself. So now,
okay.
yeah. Go ahead.
Now you're good. Yeah. So
Number
that's
3.
generally how we. Okay. We're good to go. So that's generally kind of how we think about something being real or not real, is whether it's mapped to, whether there's some kind of external source of information that's modulating what we're seeing. And if there is, then we say that it's real. But then this invites another type of reality, if you like. We can think there's like a type B reality, which is when, well, what if there is some kind of intelligence, let's say, some kind of normally invisible, discarnate intelligent agent that decides, I want Andrew to see a glass flask, right? Because this is an important message. I really want him to see a glass flask. And so this intelligent agent directs information into my brain such that I see in front of me a glass flask. then we ask, well, okay, is that real? And that's a slightly trickier one. In one sense, it's not real because there's no glass flask there in front of me. But in another sense, it is real because there is some kind of external information coming in from this intelligent agent which is directing that vision. So I see DMT visions, or I lean towards the position, the kind of the position I've reached is that DMT visions are of that type. They're that type of reality, in that you're not seeing. When I see a reptilian alien or an insectoid, I don't think I'm actually seeing a being that has the form of an earthly creature. What I think I'm seeing is an image that is being directed by this intelligent agent. Um, and so the question then becomes, well, this code that we're seeing, let's assume this code is significant. Let's assume that it is meaningful. Is it of the first type of reality, i.e., is it something out there in the environment, like an object we would normally imagine to be a real object, or is it real in the sense that it is being directed by some intelligent agent? So, for example, if, let's say, reality is computed in some way and it is being run on some sort of code, and there was some intelligence that wanted to inform us of this fact, how would they do this? Now, they could show us the code itself, which we might not recognize as code. It might be completely meaningless to us. It might be code that doesn't have a visual form in any kind of way, that could be faithfully represented in any kind of visual form. Or this intelligence could show us something that looks like code, and that appears to be running through the environment, that contained digits that we would recognize as digits, that contain structures that we would clearly identify as looking exactly like code, and we would get the message, right? So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that this code could be real, quote unquote real, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to invoke the idea that it exists as an object in the environment in the same way that other objects in the environment are real. And how do we distinguish between, I guess, between those two types of reality, as an object in the environment or simply as a directed vision that carries meaning um, um, because it's directed by some kind of intelligence that's trying to tell us something by showing people who see this code, showing them this particular vision. Perhaps I'd like you to, before I continue, kind of comment on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So these as we
You're
talk more.
muted on X.
Ah,
You're muted on X.
okay. So yes, thank you for reminding me. Absolutely, and this is where this is a perfect example of how my interaction with you constantly uh, makes things clearer and clearer for me, because one of the main things that I'm noticing in just these conversations around the edges of ontology is that unless both parties are coming in good faith and really, really trying to understand, there's simply no chance, because we all carry different frames. And even outside of agreeing on what we mean by the terms, what is much more difficult to usually excavate is what people already take for granted, because that's invisible to them as well. And one of the things that I'm kind of noticing now is that I actually the more I hear you talk, the more I understand that I agree with you on literally every single point. It's just that I guess the way that I'm coming at the world is I'm trying to dial things in to the simplest components, to like the simplest one thing I can say about something that will encompass as many of them as possible. Which I guess it's how, scientists also approach basically everything. It's just that in order to get at what in fact it is versus what we think it is, you kind of have to probe it from multiple directions. So you have to create terms, you have to create ideas around it, axioms, and then see what sticks, right? So one of the things I've just identified that maybe there's a lot more convergence than I previously realized. Is that this word "real"? The way I would just define it, and you tell me how it hits you. So actually, it's not. I guess it's not even that simple. But so you have this idea, right? The phenomenology either comes in one flavor or two flavors. And of course, there's other ideas, but the one flavor idea is that it's all mind made, and even the rigidity of objects and the physicality of things, it's still within the. It's a much more idealistic perspective, right? And then there's the two flavor phenomenology, which says, well, there's the phenomenology of how it presents itself to you, but then there's the thing within itself, like what it actually is. It's, I guess, it's a slightly more physicalist perspective, but not in the old sense of just like, oh, there's the physical universe and then there's somehow brains arise. No, even in the sense of like there's some thing, there's some substrate that it is, some fabric that out of which everything is made. Even if you want to say the fabric is some kind of a universal field, it doesn't matter. It's a something versus a no thing. And in that sense, it is very difficult, if maybe impossible, to say whether whatever it is that is happening only in minds or also happening outside of minds. So because I think it's impossible to differentiate. I think the only thing that I care about is the thing that tracks over time and can be um, tested, which is the thing we're trying to do. So is it made as content by someone else, or is it a fundamental thing that is actually running things? I don't know, and I am not married to either proposition. What I mean by the word real is, so for example, if you hear a voice of a person on a radio, it's not a real voice. It's not their real voice, but it is some signal that somebody put on through a different medium to then communicate something. There's an agency on the other side. There's somebody created this to do this thing, right? So in that sense, even if the code is more of a content created to pull our attention versus a thing that actually runs something fundamental, to me that still counts for real because it is of the radio flavor. And then to
I
me
agree.
they're indistinguishable. Of course, they're very distinguished in terms of they're very distinguishable in terms of the importance of what you can do with it. Because if it's just kind of a voice on the radio, there's very little you can say about reality from it because to some degree it's orthogonal to reality. It's just kind of another signal in reality. But if it is a fundamental thing, that you should be able to probe it just like you can probe anything that is fundamental, right? So I'm. This is wonderful because I previously wasn't sure around certain points what your disagreement was, but now I understand it. The best I could say when people would always come on, people always try to start a thing. They would say like, "Oh, why is Andrew doing this or why is Andrew doing that?" And I said, "Well, look, the best argument I can give for why I think Andrew holds his position is that if I have to put myself in his shoes, and I'm just a somebody, for all intents and purposes, coming out of nowhere, just like 1,000 others that sent you emails, and then I have an idea, just like 1,000 others who sent you an email, because of the amount of work required to understand the intricacies of the thing we're actually discussing, the more likely assumption is that most people are confused versus onto something. So to me, it's very clear that it's a very logical thing to assume that the more rational thing is that, well, maybe there's something there, but it didn't quite pass the threshold for you from which it should be now addressed more seriously than any other claim that was made, no matter how extravagant or mundane. And it's enforced, it's reinforced by the fact that, because I know you haven't done it, you just basically referred to the closest people to you in the field who have, and you asked for their opinion, and their opinion was, I don't know, man, I didn't see it. From which position I would probably take the exact same train of thought as you. So I completely understand that part. But if you're asking me about this, the solidity, the nature of what the code is, that distinction that you just raised is a very helpful one. And I don't know, but I think that there is a way to know. And a final thing I would say on this before I'll let you continue is that I think I voiced this to you last time we spoke on X. To me, the question, can we explain it in terms of what the brain is kind of doing just internally, is not a good question here because it is to some degree infinitely elastic. It's you can always say yes to that because to some degree the brain is too incomplete. But if what I think the question that should be guiding this process is how, what kind of tests can we run to make that distinction? Is there anything we can say that will help us steer us one way or the other?
Yes, I mean, I agree. I think my initial reluctance, if you like, which was a perfectly natural one. I mean, I think some people thought I was just going to fall in line and go, yes, this is exactly what you're saying it is, and that people don't understand, my work or how I work to think that that was even remotely possible. But I think, yeah, I think my initial resistance was my understanding at the time that what I felt, and it may well have been mistaken, but this kind of in I felt was that you were wedded to the idea that it was the kind of the first type of reality, right? In that, in the same way that that it's a physical object in the environment, it's the actual code itself in that form that you are seeing, and that code is running reality. That to me seemed like a very firm, inelastic position that I think there was that the evidence simply didn't allow us to jump to that. It seemed like a huge leap. However, now whether my understanding has developed or whether it's more of a bit, a consequence of the back and forth between us, that your position has maybe broadened. I don't know if that's fair to say, or relaxed a little bit, or that you seem much more open now to the idea that it could be, real, in the same way that I think other DMT visions are real, in that there is some agency behind them. I mean, it would be very weird if I was to say, look, I think DMT allows us to contact with, interact with advanced intelligences that allows you to see things that they're directing. However, Danny, what you're seeing is not that. I mean, that wouldn't make any sense. Um, but how I would interpret what you're seeing is this is a particular aspect, and to some extent quite repeatable and reliable way of isolating a particular type of phenomenology, which would be this, again, part of the broader phenomenology of some kind of intelligent agent directing information into the brain, directing visions. And in this case, what they are directing, or it is directing, or he or she or they, them, is. Um, is is some kind of code-like imagery, which may indeed carry some kind of message. It may be that may be telling us something. What they're telling us, I don't know. Are they telling us something about the fundamental structure of reality? But you don't need to assume that they are showing you the actual code in order for you to get the message, that code is somehow important in the message they're trying to transmit. That absolutely, I'm very, very much open to that idea. And so in that sense, I'm very open to the idea that the code is real, but in a very particular sense, in the same sense that I think other DMT visions are real. So that's, I think as we were saying when we were talking in LA, actually the Venn diagram of our positions overlaps quite a lot, if not entirely, to be honest. And I think there's
I
just a
agree.
lot of misunderstanding, both between ourselves and with a lot of people who listen to what both of us have said. So I guess moving on from that, the the question still remains, and it's been central to my work, is how do you take something, and this is something which I've wrestled with. In my book, I start with my first ever experience more than 20 years ago, and the kind of the private revelation, if you like. Um, when I was speaking on Matt Bell's podcast in Florida. He asked me, how sure are you that you're dealing with some kind of external intelligence? And I said, I'm going to give you two answers that seem to be different, but actually they coexist. The first answer is I'm 100% sure. I know, right? From 30 seconds after I first inhaled DMT more than 20 years ago, I've known. So in that sense, yeah, I'm pretty sure. But on the other hand, what I can't say is that the evidence shows. I have to I have to find a way to bring it out of private revelation and say, okay, what can we actually take? What data can we take from the DMT experience, the structure of it, the content, the information, and bring it out of private revelation and actually show people? Because you can't just say forever and ever, oh, you just need to try it, man. I mean, that's always the response. And yes, you're just multiplying the number of people who have this private revelation, but you're never really being able to kind of objectively, to use that word, demonstrate, and that's always the problem. And so I look at, after that first chapter in Death by Astonishment, I leave behind private revelation and I get into, okay, now we need to start analyzing this more objectively and eliminating, that a big chunk of the book is eliminating alternative explanations, deconstructing them, analyzing them, showing why I think they fail, and then we reach into speculation. And I do that by leaning heavily on neuroscience and how the brain constructs our model of the world, and the limitations of that, and how those limitations betray themselves under other circumstances during dreaming and during the hallucinations of people with various neuropsychological conditions, why the Jungian model fails. I basically trying, at least from a neurobiological perspective, how the Jungian model fails, and then say, okay, there's so much left that's unaccounted for. This is why we need to take DMT seriously. And so the same question then applies to this code thing. Is you can't just, as you well appreciate, simply multiply the number of people with the private revelation that they are convinced that it's real and that it's meaningful. We have to think, okay, what data? How do we bring data out that tells us it's more than that? And I know you have certain approaches that seem to lean more on an assumed or a hoped for physicality of the code, whether it's magnets and that kind of thing. Whereas I think, me personally, I'm more interested in the structure of it and the actual informational content. Is there a way for us to show, for example, that when two people are viewing the code, that they are indeed, I know this it gets said a lot, everyone sees the same thing, but I think you would also agree that we don't really know that everyone's seeing exactly the same thing and everyone's seeing exactly the same characters at the same time. And so is there a way, do you think, to pull out data from this code and show, yes, this is informationally rich, it is meaningful, and that people are, in fact, seeing the same code? Is that possible, do you think?
Well, first of all, yes, I do think it's possible, but I think it reveals both the intricacies and the real conundrum between these definitions of subjective and objective, because I think that ultimately subjective refers to always that personal revelation part. Objective refers not necessarily to the ultimate truth statement about something, but about applicability. So it's possible that somebody would see something completely real that actually exists. Let's say they have an experience with God. Let's for the sake of this argument, let's pretend God is real and exists, and then they have a revelation. So they saw the truth, if that is in fact true, but maybe it's that kind of a thing that simply, for some reason, God simply never allows a certain amount of the truth of the matter of that flavor to ever be applicable. It's just not how it's constructed. So it will never fit into the objective frame, but it is true if it is in fact true, right, in this case. So
Mm.
I would say that I like to make this distinction between subjective, referring to glimpses of what potentially is true of reality as a whole, and then objective refers more to what is applicable to currently in our current bubble of existence, however it's constructed, right? Because that's the only thing we can say. And that brings me squarely to, uh, I think, a quirk of the conversation that really is a central one, and that is of what physical is. Because if you and I, the same way that we can't know if we're looking exactly at the same code, if we're standing in a living room together and we're looking at the same couch, I don't really have a way to know if you're seeing the same thing. There's simply no way I can know, and vice versa. However, we will both bump into the couch. So there's something about physicality that is fundamentally different than any other perception that we have, because it is some kind of a solidified structure that limits us in a different way, that no matter what you think about it, it is what it is. So you can still allow for the possibility that what physical at bottom is still somehow mind, but then if you are interested in answering serious questions about our ontology, you would still have to address why is it that this portion of the mind solidifies itself to such a regularity that you can call it the laws of physics, even if it is made out of mind stuff, whatever it is. So to me, that is always the central question. This relationship between what is physical, right? And we addressed this together both when we had dinner with Paul and in our conversations. So the reason I gave you this long roundabout is because I want to flash out how I see the enterprise of trying to figure it out. It's not like you start from ideation and you try and then it works. It's kind of it's almost it's interwoven. They go together. It's like, it's that you have some ideas, but they're all based on your previous experience, and then you build on that, right? So I think that the answer to this would come. This is, by the way, what you just mentioned about it doesn't matter how, you can't just go on forever testing a bunch of people and saying, well, everybody saw it. How do you know? I fully agree. Even if you allow 1 million people to see it, which, yes, it will raise some confidence in it significantly, but it would never give you this final kind of like scratch of the itch and saying, yeah, okay. You simply don't know. You have to have some empirical way to measure it. And the only way to do that, as far as I know, is to probe it physically. And by the way, when I say physically, it includes whatever the brain is doing and how it perceives light and all of that stuff, right? Because in the process of trying to answer that this way, we might actually discover something about the link between what consciousness is and what physicality is. Maybe they are one and the same, but I think there's something there that will allow us to actually discern that even, versus just discerning what the code is. Some ideas that you're already aware of, which we tried, but some didn't work, and then we're going to try it with, didn't work with these magnets. We're going to try with more powerful magnets. It's the Russian way. If it doesn't work with force, it will work with more force. um, but but there are other more sophisticated ways of doing it. I think they will have to include some of these technologies that I know you're very reluctant to adopt, but probably because you have a lot more deeper understanding of the technicalities of those, like what you spoke with Danny Jones about, the hybrid thing between AIs and EEGs and things like this. Yes, it is in its rudimentary form, and currently it's more of like a caricature version of what it should be. But hey, man, if it's not Neuralink, eventually something will do that, right? Like if the brain produces these signals through some crackling of the wavelengths in the brain, through complex electrochemistry. Is that on your end? Oh, is that just
Yes.
police? I thought I
I
was
live
hoping
near
it's
a fire station, so
okay.
it's
I hope it wasn't like a tsunami. It's just another
no,
one.
no, no.
We would see it as a sign. We're onto something. But yeah, so I think that ultimately I think you would agree, and correct me, of course, if I'm wrong, because I've discovered new shades of you as a person that I wasn't aware of before, like your openness to these like extrasensory things. I didn't know that you're open to the possibility of those at all. Like that was not clear to me. See, it's hard to know what people take for granted.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I think that ultimately it would have to be, if you're asking, like, would it ever be possible on the way that, like, we know that you can measure an electromagnetic, a magnetic current or electric current, only if we have things like very advanced versions of projection from the, like, if you can record from the cortex, okay, now you're getting there. Now that would trump no matter how many people saw it, right? Because now you ask the device to measure this thing that we know what it does, and now you have to project it on the screen, and now you can really analyze it. I think we'll reach the answers a lot earlier than that, but I'm acutely aware of my track record of promising you to make a big progress in a year and then not delivering. So I'm all I can say is that I have the hopeful the hopeful spirit, but I can't know for sure. But my intuition tells me strongly that it will not only there's a way to do it, doing it will tell us something fundamental. It will allow us to discern something very fundamental we did not understand before.
Okay. Um,
By the way, this is a good question to ask you.
mm,
What
go on.
what is the real the like I understand broadly what the big issue in being able to do that, but didn't they already have some rudimentary devices that could kind of translate, through cracklings of brains, through some kind of a rudimentary Rosetta Stone that they created to create like images on the screen? Didn't we already have this like 10 years ago, 15 years ago? No matter how grainy or like, what is the real technical difficulty in doing that aside from mapping larger and larger portions of the brain?
I think people overestimate the ability of that technology, and it appears on in newspapers and on websites as
So
if
before
we're
you run in the
recording
in the
imagery.
in an infinite other direction, I what I'm specifically asking you. Of course, I'm aware that usually people make too much out of what's out there because they're excited. I
Mm,
get it too. I'm asking you specifically if you would have to, if I have a magic wand and I'm giving Andrew
mm.
Gallimore $5 trillion right now. What would be the first like big problems that needs to be solved from everything that you know to be able to even make it plausible to actually have the kind of thing that people claim to be excited about? You see what I'm saying? Like, what are those central problems in neuroscience that you have to solve? Is it perfectly mapping the brain? Is it creating some kind of an ability of interface that is of a way higher rate of measuring the brain in real time that we currently even remotely close to? Is it all of the above? What are these central problems that are limiting
Yeah.
us? Yeah.
Well, I think it's all of the above, and of course, everyone's brain is different, and the way that I structure everyone's brain emerges, um, and it's an extremely complex system with levels of complexity. It's complex at every single level of organization, from the molecular all the way up to the global cortical level. And yes, you can show someone an image, and a set of images, for example, of different natural scenes or animals or whatever, and you can record their brain activity, and then you can kind of reproduce. Um, if you show someone one of six images, um, an elephant, let's say, then you can record their brain activity, and you can say, okay, they were looking at an elephant. Um, as opposed to these other five images, a house or a car or whatever. But what we don't have is the ability to simply read someone's brain, who might be experiencing visions that are completely novel, that are completely unlike anything else, and say, okay, this is a kind of detailed readout, a detailed image of exactly what they're seeing, because imagery isn't just images. It's not just the the world isn't just a screen. It is a many leveled and layered constructed thing that operates from over many levels of this cortical hierarchy. Um, and that's happening all the time. And these cortical hierarchies are each extremely complex, and they're all speaking to each other, and they're all connected to each other. And being able to just read that and generate a two-dimensional image is just not. We're just so far from that. I think maybe we'll get there in the future, but the idea that we the long and short of it is the idea that we can read someone's neural activity, certainly with like an EEG, which is very um, um, coarse-grained data. Maybe if you could record from very, very large, billions of neurons or something at the same time, or millions of neurons at least at the same time, and get data from each neuron, then maybe you might be able to approach that. But I just don't see the informational density of the signals that you're getting from an EEG is even close. It might allow you to distinguish, as I said, between one of six pictures that they're looking at and say, oh, you were looking at the cow, weren't you? And go, oh, that's amazing, yes. And they might even be able to present this blurry kind of image reconstruction of what they were shown earlier. But that's not reading someone's brain. Well, it's not at least just reading imagery directly from someone's brain. And I think that generally represents a misunderstanding of how perception works and of how the brain constructs. It's a very old way of looking at, a very naive way of looking at it, of the idea that the world is just images in the brain, and it's not, unfortunately. So that approach you might be a long way off. You want to go down that route, is to read this code directly from the brain. I mean, that would be very
There's
cool if you
no
could do that. But
there's no, and by the way, if you what you can do while I'm talking, if you bothered by the second, what I did is I just while you're talking, I'm just lowering the volume on my phone, and that way I
yeah,
can
I
still
tried
talk.
that. It
But
doesn't
yeah,
allow you to mute it. I don't know why.
no, you
Can't
don't have to
even
mute it.
mute it.
Just lower the
Yeah.
volume of your phone itself all the way down, not inside of X.
Yeah.
It's up to you. So, by
Yeah.
the way, I realized that for the whole previous section, I was muted on X, and apologies to everybody on X. But if you want to watch this part of the conversation, or if you want to watch us also on live right now in a video feed, you can go to Dango Thoughts on YouTube, DANGO Thoughts on YouTube, and you can watch us talk there as well. And we'll release this conversation also as like an edited version, so don't worry about that. You can hear this part. One, so I completely understand what you're saying. Is that the people, for the most part, kind of think of the brain because we perceive some kind of a coherent image of everything that's going on. What you're saying is it's not quite like a TV. You have some kind of like a like a unified field of perception that is somehow comes
Mm.
about at the tail end of a very long chain of signals. Which signal do you tap into? Is it's all technically encrypted, like you don't, it's all crackles, like there's no, you can kind of create a Rosetta Stone of this region or this region. So what you're saying is then not only you're going to have to create a full Rosetta Stone of each region that's already like infinitely more complex than anything we can even recognize. Now you're talking about the whole brain. It's like, so I can totally see how you would say this is like maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe 100 years out. Um,
Mm.
but on the other hand, if it is just signals, it's just a matter of the amount of data you can kind of, consolidate together into something coherent. Isn't there, and maybe the answer is no. Maybe I'm kind of taking us back to the more naive perception of it. But in a TV, it's also the case that you have a lot less complex signals, but you have electromagnetic waves kind of coming in. They're translated, and then they're put as pixels, arranged as pixels on the screen. As
Mm.
far as we know currently, aside from the actual experiencer it's himself or herself as a unified thing, is there no close part of the brain, at least of the visual, like of what we perceive at the tail end of it, not of the visual cortex and the way it processes information, but like, is there the close to the equivalent of the screen for us that we can get close to, or not even remotely?
Well, no, because there isn't a tail end as such. Because the world that you're seeing is actually not. You don't just see the kind of the output of all this processing, but the world you're experiencing now is the stuff that's going on at the back of the cortex, the primary visual cortex, which I think is what they're normally measuring. This is the information that's being received from the retina. So this is this very messy pattern of lines and very simple shapes and colors, and moving in certain direction, lines in certain orientations. This is just a mess. It's a jumble. It's noisy, and the actual world you experience is kind of is that, but it's also built on top of that. So the objects that you recognize in the environment, these are all built on top of that as well. So you have all of these layers at the same time, from the very fine details being represented at the lower ends of the cortical hierarchy at the back of the brain, all the way up to the top, and also being supplemented by information coming from your memory systems as well, from your hippocampus, which is also informing how you see the world now. You see the world now as you saw it before. You are kind of remembering the present, if you like. So yeah, it's very complicated, and it's not like there is this output that you can, if you could only find the output stream, that you could tune into that. No, unfortunately, that's not going to happen. And of course, also, just because you were able to do that with one brain, with one human, doesn't mean that if I did the same thing with another human, it would work, because brains are actually very different. And
Really, to that
you'd have
extent?
to kind of,
Like, there's not enough regularity to talk about?
well, there might be, of course, there's certainly common areas that we use, but I can't say that if I found, for example, if I stimulate a certain very particular part of my brain, right, high up in the cortical hierarchy, and I said, oh, I see a dog, right, and they say, we found that area of the brain that represents dogs. You can do that. But then if I stimulated, first of all, how would I find the exact same region of your brain? Because brains aren't identical. There's no such thing as the same region in your brain that exists in my brain. There's broad area, but
Oh,
so I can't. Right. So in other words, the area of your brain that represents dogs, for example, when you see a dog, your brain is constructing a model of a dog, and there's a certain part of the brain high up that kind of contains or represents the overall dog concept. Right? Then you have the finer details of this particular dog that you're looking at that are represented at the lower ends that are being stimulated by sensory inputs. So there's no way for someone to say, oh, I've stimulated exactly this part of Andrew's brain, and that causes him to see visions of
the
dogs.
dog part.
Now, the dog part, right? We have like a fusiform face area, right? It's called that's important for representing faces. There isn't like a direct, exact other position in your brain, because your folds are going to be slightly different. We can say the broad area, yeah, this is the area of Danny's brain that represents certain types of complex objects, living creatures, for example. That is probably, we can probably map between our brains those areas. But the very specific set of neurons that represents dogs is probably different in your brain than it is to mine. And so because there's no exact, I don't have the same neurons in exactly the same configuration as you do, but we both learned as we developed to construct models of dogs, but how we arrived at that is going to be slightly different. So yeah, what we learn from one person's brain is not going to work, not going to apply at this lowest, most fine-grained level to someone else's brain. It's not. We're not a machine. Televisions are very different. They are machines. It's all rigid, and you can set up one television so the circuitry is exactly the same, and so it interprets electromagnetic data in exactly the same way. And so we know that we have 5, 10 televisions, all made by different television manufacturers. They're all going to show the same image because they're all set up to receive data in the same way. But that doesn't quite work with brain, unfortunately. So yeah,
I
to labour the point, but it's not going to
no,
work.
that's a very important one to emphasize, because sometimes the intricacies of these points are where the the real understanding lies. It's sometimes hard to really get to the bottom of it. Um, where do you? I think we did touch on it when we spoke, but like I want to see if I can explore this with you now. Where do you fall on the assumption that there is some fundamental thing outside of our perception, um, or is it all perception? Like, and it might not be a clear cut line for you, but like, where do you err more? On what side do you err more? Like, do you believe that there's a fundamental substructure beyond our perception, and our perception is a part of it, or our perception is somehow linked to the ultimate kind of perceiver, so to speak?
Oh, I mean, that's a very deep question, and one that I don't know the answer to, and I'm not wedded to either idea. I've often said that in many ways I'm an idealist. I think that consciousness is absolutely fundamental, and I don't think there's anything other than consciousness. But
We agree.
that doesn't really help us much, because we have to choose. We have to kind of choose, um, what is our foundation, and I, even though I believe that yes, the brain is part of that whole structure of whatever it is, the ultimate reality, or the foundational consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. Just saying that, I think it doesn't it doesn't progress the discussion much, which is why I focus on the neuroscience. And what I'm trying to do ultimately in my work is, as I've said many times before, is not to tell people what DMT represents, but to get people to think beyond often very naive and not well thought out ideas about what DMT represents. That, oh, it's just hallucination, it's just your brain making it up, it's your brain on drugs, etc., etc., and actually get them to think more deeply. For many people, that's not even possible. But for those that are capable of considered thought without presumptions. I'm not saying that people are stupid. I'm just saying that people often have with come loaded with preconceptions about things, and that it's very difficult sometimes for people to break out of that. And that's all that I try to do, to get people to consider the possibility that actually there's something far stranger going on with DMT than we're capable of explaining, and that it might involve intelligent agents, just as we are intelligent agents, whether we are actually physical beings or whether we are single perspectives of one broader consciousness. That could be true as well. But the idea that I'm getting asking people to consider is that, like we are, some kind of conscious agent, that we could be interacting with other conscious agents. And how do we know this? How do we what can we glean from the DMT experience and the content and the structure and the information content? What can we glean from all of that to make people consider that as a real possibility? But whether we're dealing with other beings that exist on other planets or something like that, very physicalist way of looking at it, whether we're dealing with post-biological super intelligent agents who've transcended their physical form and instantiated themselves into the basic structure of space-time, or whether we're dealing with conscious intelligent agents that the nature of which we simply have no ability to comprehend or understand. And I think that's also possible. And in fact, the DMT experience itself suggests something like that, that we aren't capable of comprehending the nature of these intelligences. Um, and yeah, if people come away from my work and with that, considering that as a possibility, then I've done my job, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm. And by the way, I was on the same hobby horse, it's just from a slightly different attempt to do that. Obviously, you're a lot more technically equipped, so I have to use the tools that I have in my disposal. And just to make a small comment about your previous comment about my evolution of where I stand with these, claims. Um, I don't know to what degree my perception of what I think it is changed. What changed is the tone that I felt is required for this stage of the communication. If you watch, everybody are welcome to go watch the first video I ever put out on the subject. Somewhere in there, because I said quite a few things, and obviously my ideation around it wasn't as evolved. I just kind of spoke. Um, I did say very openly, this is the beginning of a conversation. And one of the important rules of engagement of a real conversation is that there's a listener, there's a speaker, and then you swap. But you really have to listen, and you really have to try and take the receiving end into account. And what I think evolved is that I got more and more of the receiving end feedback to how what I'm saying is perceived. And what I got from you very very clearly is like, well, your tone is just too strident. Like, and it's very difficult to stand in the face of something that seems to be so certain because who am I? I don't feel like I need to fight the battle of convincing you otherwise because there's no softness of middle interaction. I took that correction, but my original like what it isness to it didn't change much. I guess what I can clarify is that what I meant to say the whole time is that whatever we're looking at is real in the sense of it. There's some kind of substructure here that isn't just internally composed. That there's something else going on, and then we can of course play with all the blows and whistles of what do you mean by external? We're like, okay, fine, but that's what I'm trying to say. And the other thing was, and this is where it was very cathartic for me to achieve clarity on that point, is that I did not come at it from like this naive perspective. This came after decades of interacting with these substances in a very um, neutral way. Like I never married myself to some propositions or ideas I had about what I think it is. Or, in fact, for the longest time, when they started, like the beings, whatever you want to call them, started kind of telling me, no, no, like for real. And I'm like, nah. And I did this for years. They almost got a little frustrated with me. They're like, "What do we have to tell you, dude?" I was like, "Nah, there's no way." And only when I followed the thread of trying to follow what I know about the world, or at least what I think I know about the world, and trying to marry it to some tangible attempt to kind of do something with it, which by the way I never thought would work. When it finally did something, it was a crescendoing to something that in fact crescendoed versus the other instances in which it just feels very significant and all of a sudden it just evaporates into nothingness, which tends to be that way in DMT. Um, Only then I all of a sudden said, okay, wait a second. And then when I started showing other people, and we were already like dozens of people in, of like saying the same thing, kind of talking about it coherently. Only then I got the kind of the okay, I think I've arrived at some reasonable state of saying I know something, and only then I kind of started talking about it. But of course, the thing that became clear to me after my interaction with you is that, well, you weren't there with me all these years, all these decades going through the process. You have no idea who I am. I'm just kind of saying things. So how can you possibly know that I went through all all the twists and turns that led me to this conclusion? You just know that I'm just another person saying things. So in that sense, that really helped to for clarity. But I think that my original statement still stands for me at least, and now it's just really how we approach this. Um, but I don't want to beat a dead horse because I think we achieved clarity there. I just wanted to make it explicit. One thing I did want to ask you, because I didn't get the chance to do that when we were in LA, and after that I guess we can you would say your piece and we can maybe open it for questions. I I was not aware that you're open to telepathy, to all of these, extra things that are now kind of like coming more into the zeitgeist of people becoming more accepting of them. Where do you stand on all this? Now, I understand that there's obviously, if you want to be a good scientist, there's some agnosticism going on all the time. You want to be open to whatever is in fact true. But in terms of like if you have to place a bet from 0% to 100%, where do you stand in terms of what we, telepathy tapes, the kids that can see through like a completely blind, like they're blinded and they see things. I don't know. I'm like kind of watching these and they're fascinating and it's amazing if we can do this. I mean, I now have a newborn and I would love for her to learn how to see like that. But they always do this. They always bring it close to the eyes that technically are not functioning. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. But I'm truly, I want it to be true, right? But I have to anyway. So I want to leave it to you to tell me what you think about all this, or maybe you didn't really look that deeply into it. I don't know.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, I'm saying that I've been saying for a while that I believe that DMT allows you to gates access to some kind of information that makes the brain more sensitive to the flow of information from some kind of discarnate intelligent agent. That's a pretty far out thing to say. So I think to suggest that information can be transferred between brains or between two consciousnesses is arguably a less far out claim. And telepathy has been studied for more than 100 years, and there's very strong evidence. You speak to David Luke, the parapsychologist, and psychedelic Indiana Jones, as he's often referred to, and he will tell you, he will give you, he will say, this is, he knows the data, he knows the research, and I kind of trust him on that. I'm not an expert on telepathy, but there's very good evidence for it. So it makes sense that if the brain is being rendered more sensitive to information broadly, then if there is such a thing as telepathy, then it makes sense that the brain would also be more sensitive to information, because telepathy is about the transfer of information. It's about receiving information to which you normally don't have access. The same with clairvoyance, or seeing through walls, or observing events at a distance, remote viewing. This is all about having access to information to which you normally don't have access. So it makes sense if you kind of broaden the model, that if DMT is making the brain more sensitive to information from this intelligent agent, that conceivably it would also be more sensitive to information arriving via telepathy or clairvoyance or remote viewing or whatever. So I'm open to it. But again, it's all about, what does the data show? And if the data shows that statistically these are highly significant events and that they're well controlled, then I don't dismiss them. And it would be weird of me to dismiss them, because I'm already saying things that are very, very far out. So,
All right.
yeah. So kind of to wrap up, I think, yes, we both agree. I believe that the DMT state broadly represents something that is not entirely internally generated, that is modulated. It's internally generated in the same way that all experienced worlds are internally generated. The world you experience now is internally generated. Dream worlds are internally generated. The DMT world is also represented in the brain, so it's in a sense internally generated. And I think we both agree that, like the normal waking world that is modulated by information external to the brain, I think the same applies to the DMT world. I don't think you're seeing the DMT world as it is, so to speak, in the same way that I can't say that we see the normal waking world, the environment as it is. But I think you're gaining access to information external to the brain. And so in that sense, it's real. And so in that sense, that should also apply to this code, in that if there is some intelligent agent that is wanting to impress upon us something, then showing imagery, manipulating the brain in such a way that you see code imagery might be an important message there. What that message is and how you extract data from that message and convince other people that it is indeed a true message is the great problem, and is the problem that applies broadly to the entire DMT phenomenology. And I think that's the great question. I don't think we have an answer yet. There are propositions and possible experiments you can do, but I think we're both wrestling with the same problem. And I think broadly we both agree on the main points here. I think going back to kind of what you were saying just then about your earlier assertions or claims, I think the whole matrix thing and source code, I think all this is it's not helpful, because that's what people pick up on, right?
Well,
That's what they're
that's
going
what
to
was
jump on.
that's what was
Yeah,
communicated to
yeah,
me by them very
sure.
directly, and then it's kind of hard
Right.
to shake it off. And this is why, by the way, if you watch the yeah, right, but if you watch the my actual, if you look at the nuance of my conversation when on a good day, um, I never offer this as a final word. I'm always emphasizing this was shown to me directly. Take this with a grain of salt, because I'm fully aware that unless you've experienced it yourself, there's no way that this is going to hold water. This is why, to me, it's clear that I want to study it more in terms of a process than a message, because the process promises a much more robust concreteness that we can potentially do something with. If we discover along the way that there's also some messages encoded in the process, some kind of a hyper object process, whatever it is, then it's easier to then you'll be able to talk about it. But um, I'm never saying it in terms of like, okay, this is. But listen, I thought about it long and hard. There's no better word that currently kind of is clear to people immediately because it's the closest thing to what I was shown that is going on. And again, I had to reformulate what I was comfortable with. I was never attracted to the simulation hypothesis. I mean, I love the movie The Matrix, one of the greatest films, but it's not. I didn't come to it wanting it to be that. In fact, if anything, it's the last thing I want to be the case, right? It seems too on the nose, so it's almost like really that's what it is. But on the other hand, it is what it is. It's just that what it is a lot more than what we think it is. So it's not like this. If what you see in the movie is kind of like one version that was made dramatized for what Hollywood needs to sell a movie, the reality is a lot more bizarre, but it is a computationally rendered world, and it's based on many, 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 many layers. That's what was shown to me, and it was kind of shown to me how it's done. But I'm not expecting anybody to take that as a gospel or as a truth claim or anything like this. I'm just sharing me, Danny, my experiences and what I've identified some signal within the DMT space that seems to be a message from the government versus just any free agent that is kind of coming and handing you a pamphlet. And it that by itself can never trump any other opinion in the space because that's not how we go about discerning what is real. But if you flip the question upside down, you ask me why are you so certain. The truth is that that's why. So that it has nothing to do with the laser. It's just that after do it, people say, well, how can you possibly know that you kind of know that it is really what you're saying, kind of like the government is like, well, it's kind of like with anything else. If you get to know a group of people, eventually you enter a new clique or whatever. You eventually kind of understand after years and decades, like who is who's the confabulator, who's the person you can rely on, who's like you can kind of get who is whom, and then you can also take the information that they're giving you with the amount of seriousness it deserves. And it's really no different because I've been doing this for so many years and at some point doing it every single day all day for like over a year. I've acquired like a very dense frame rate of this where the information is clearer, the resolution of it clearer. So when I see the the what I call the simulators appear, I'm like, okay, I know what this is. It's not some guy just selling you something. This is like pay attention. The government is talking to you, but not to you. Again, this is another point that before we go to the quick Q&A, to something you were saying before, even if it is made in this way, kind of like a signal somebody trying to communicate with you, I think you and I agreed that the thing that makes the most sense is that it's pre-recorded. Like it's automated. It's not like made just for you in that instance. Or maybe if it did, it's made more in the sense of like just like ChatGPT makes content for you in the real time. But it's made because of what you were doing with it. It's not necessarily, people waiting for you with a, with a with a with
Mm.
a with the party balloons. Are like, "Woo, he's here!" Like Terrence used to say, right? It's like um, as much as I love Terrence, I've never seen any of the stuff that he's talking about. I've never seen machine elves. I've never seen self-dribbling basketballs. Never seen any of that. But my DMT space is very different, and that's why I want to potentially even slightly challenge your assertion that I don't think I'm actually seeing an insectoid. No, I think they are. So and if you ask me like why do you think that why would it be something that we know from this world? The best guess I can give you is that functions create particular uh, geometric structures because of the nature of what they are, right? So like if an eddy on the water happens in a certain way, the reason it's circular is because of the dynamics of what water is and its surface tension, all of that stuff. Well, it's possible that in reality, because functions create shapes, shapes are indicators of functions. So it is possible that the ones that kind of weave realities are closer to the kind of thing, the kind of shape being that is uh, better for hive mind function. because if you were going to be weaving realities, you better be kind of plugged in into the same kind of hive mind kind of sector. So to me, that would be one possibility of why that is, and because it doesn't make sense. They're always the ones that are the, so to speak, the management company. They're always these insectoids. And it is interesting because your whole thing is like alien insects. I was like, I only found that out later, and I was like, that's so interesting. But then, it wasn't related to what I'm saying right now. It's not related to your handle or anything. It seems to be a regular enough of a motif with this robustness of realness that other beings don't necessarily carry, and I don't see any reason for them to appear as something that clearly is terrifying to humans. Why would they choose that shape? Like, they would shape out of 1,000 other shapes, but it seems to me that there might be a function there that is in the way that they appear. Like, and that might be hive mind or might be something else. But again, to make this clear right here, right now, all of this is just kind of Danny playing with ideas. I'm not saying that you need to think that now. Well,
Yeah, I mean, this is a big question. We should get into that in another time. But I think, yeah, I mean, I think there's an interplay going on when you see an insectoid. Is that there's I think there's part of what's going on is that yes, there is probably certain characteristics of these intelligences. Whether it's they exist as some kind of hive mind, and in the same way that earthly insects do. But of course, the form of an insect in our reality kind of emerges from the way it interacts with and the
the
way that it
environment.
evolves and the
Hmm.
way that this particular environment. So the idea that a discarnate, what I'm saying really is that I don't see, I don't think we need to assume that just because we're seeing an insectoid that it actually occupies that form and that it could be using that form, or it might be part of the brain's attempts to make sense of these creatures by drawing on sort of deeper archetypal structures to try and fit these beings into certain categories, because they're rarely actual insect. These are not insect hallucinations, but therefore they have an insectoid quality. And
Hmm.
sometimes even when you can't really see them, or they don't have an obvious form, people say, oh, there was something insectoid about this thing. And so I think you're kind of connecting to ideas, but I think it's very much a fluid and open question as whether we're actually
Absolutely,
dealing with
absolutely.
insectoid beings, because
We
once you
yeah.
say that, you know, yeah.
No, no, we agree. I just
But
think that
anyway, that's
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
long conversation.
of
We
course.
agree.
Well, just to throw
Yeah,
this small one on you,
yeah.
it's possible that the reason that they do appear more like insectoids, that what I was talking about, the shape implies function, is that there might be some universal topological reason for it. Like there might be something about like shapes that transcend substrates, and this is why in our reality, the ones that are hive minds look like this in combination with what our environment is. But even in a different environment, they would still hold most likely that kind of shape. Now, the last word you said on this is exactly right. Of course, this is like a very open question. This is the understatement of the year. But it just just to share my intuition with you that I actually think that they might not be far from what that actually is. And I mean, but we can leave it up open completely, of course.
Okay,
Okay, so
right.
do
So
you
how are we
want to
going to
open
do
it?
this? Are we going to shut down Riverside and then move directly?
No,
Can
no,
we
no.
do both?
Let's no, no.
We can do both.
Because yeah, because people would be able to hear,
We
and
can
then
do
we
it.
can have it
Yeah.
in
Oh,
the
that's right.
recording. Yeah. So then
Okay. Can I?
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say just like a 3 minute bathroom break for everyone and myself, and then we come back
Perfect.
and Q&A.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Okay. So 3 minutes, everyone.
Awesome. I'm
All
okay, so
right.
I'll entertain them in the meanwhile.
Okay.
All right. So in the meanwhile, you guys can throw some questions, and I can kind of think about which ones would be best. And if you guys are on X, I think we're gonna give the first go to everybody on X because people get to talk. And if you guys on YouTube, feel free to jump on X now, either Andrew's page or mine. Mine is Goler Danny, and you should be able to. Oh, it's on Andrew Gallimore's. So go to his page right now. Let me share that one again. Right here, and then you guys can either jump on, or you can write questions here, and I will share them with Andrew. This is the one for X. There you go, guys. We're curious to see if the code is symbology changes with depth or experience. Thinking of this will alter perception, clarity, or some other aspect to be discussed. Yes? Refreshment break indeed. Hey, Bubon. Hi, Chucho. Want to say hi to people? No? You're crazy right now? You're crazy right now? You're a crazy boy? You're a crazy boy? Okay. Okay. This is just 90 pounds of excitement. I'm going to take you after. Okay. Yes. I know. I know. Rich! Hold on. Let me see if I can make sure that the doggy is taken care of. 1 second. Be right back, guys. He's crazy. He's a crazy boy right now. Whoa. Grandpa's gonna take you. Go. Go.
Okay,
All right.
so we're back. So just for kind of the rules of engagement, first try and be reasonably brief and coherent with your questions rather than kind of long expositions and hypotheses and theories, because we've probably got quite a few people who want to ask questions, so don't hog the microphone, so to speak. And also, please, no questions directed to me about personal use or anything like that. I don't answer them. I've gone over many times before why I don't answer these questions, but it should be obvious. So yeah, apart from that, do you want to manage the questions, Danny,
Uh,
or should I, or
sure. We
you
can.
can?
I'm sure it will flow. So let's because you're gonna have to unmute people anyway. It's your live.
Oh, I have to unmute people, yeah.
Yeah, you have to bring them on. So guys, feel free to raise your hands right now. And X is gonna have the first go because people get to talk and then we can actually hear them, which is great. And then I'm gonna share a few questions with you from our live chat. Can you see the live chat by the way here, or only I can see it?
I can see it.
Okay, cool. I thought it was special. Okay. So if you guys raised your hand on X, Andrew will be able to. I don't see any hands raised, which is surprising actually.
Are we, I mean, can
And
people
if not,
actually hear me?
all right. Well, if you guys don't have any, I saw some hands before and then disappeared. Okay. Well, if you guys don't have any hands up, well, there's no problem. We're just
Requests.
gonna.
Oh, wait a minute. We've got requests coming in.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I've got requests. Okay, so I'm going to go. I'll kind of tell you what order I'm going in. I'm going with. Okay, I'm going with. Going to go with Jack first, then Entropy Labs, Apollo, BB. If you put your hand down, you will leave the list. Okay, so I will just allow people in one at a time, and we'll go from there.
Cool.
Okay, so first up is Jack. Okay, Jack, you can now speak.
Is he talking? Am I missing it?
No, not yet. Jack. Jack there. Yeah,
Okay.
Jack. Where are you, Jack?
You
Okay,
can just
I'll
move on to
come
the
back.
next person. You can come back to him.
I'll come back to him. It's okay. I'm gonna try with BB. So BB can now speak. You're muted, BB, so unmute, and then you should
It's
be able
on
to
the hanging
speak.
on the door. That is weird. Hey, Ebony, would you do us a favor and jump on X and raise your hand to see if it actually works? Ebony is my moderator. Oh, I think we're good.
BB.
That perfect.
I'm here, Andrew,
There we go.
and Dan. I'm not sure if anyone's able to hear me.
Yeah, I can hear
We
you.
can hear you perfectly fine. Yeah.
Perfect, right on. I just have a question for you. What I experience with it, there's a few things I notice right off the bat is my vision gets better, and not just I think it's better. I wear glasses, and my phone is crisp, the computer's crisp, the keyboard is perfect. That's the first question. And the second question is, I see geometrical patterns like I'm, I'm just trying to figure out. And then I sometimes I'm slightly depressed, and whenever I experience with DMT, I feel better for like the next week. But those are my three things. I just wanted to put those out and see what Andrew, what you had to say. And thanks, Dan.
Yeah, I think the the observation that DMT and other psychedelics, particularly psilocybin as well,
Oh, now
improves.
can
Can you hear
you
me?
lower the volume? Oh, yeah. Just did it work for you to lower
I
the
just
volume
did.
on the?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
There you go.
yeah. So the idea that DMT and psilocybin can improve acuity of vision, this has been well documented for decades now. It seems to be a real effect, and there's probably a very good neurological explanation for what's going on in terms of what's happening probably at the lower ends of the cortical hierarchy. Um, so without going into the weeds too much, when oh, this is annoying me.
Yeah, I don't know. It all of a sudden started doing that. It wasn't doing that. That's
Yeah.
so weird.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I will try and talk over myself whilst listening to my echo.
What changed? So weird. Yeah, I don't know what changed.
But yeah, so without getting too into details, there is, you know, neurons in the cortex. They're obviously highly
Oh, wait. I think,
interconnected, and
sorry,
they.
before you continue, if you can mute BB just for this portion, maybe that's what it is. Because he is somehow looping back. Is that possible?
Andrew, I think we lost you.
You lost me.
Nope, now you're back.
Okay. Okay. What I'm going to do is just mute you and see if that helps. Okay. Ah, is that better?
Yep.
Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, so I need to mute people after they ask the question.
Perfect.
So don't try and chime in because you won't be able to hear you. Yeah, so neurons are in the primary visual cortex, the back of the brain. These are highly interconnected and they inhibit each other as well. So you get this surround inhibition. So neurons are when a certain area of the primary visual cortex is activated, it tends to inhibit surrounding areas, and this mutual inhibition going on, and psychedelics seem to interfere with that process or enhance that process if they create a sharper division between structures and lines, so things appear much sharper than they do in the normal waking state. Whether that's actually adaptive, whether you're actually seeing more clearly, I don't think anyone's done proper testing on whether your vision is actually improved. Things appear much sharper, and it looks. And I've certainly experienced this. It looks like you're seeing things much more clearly. Whether it's actually improving your vision is an interesting question. That would be interesting to test. Whether you took someone to an ophthalmologist or an optometrist and got them to smoke a bit of DMT and then tested their vision immediately afterwards, would they actually see an improvement? I'd like to see that study done. So yes, it's a real effect, or it's at least a very well observed effect, and I think someone should definitely do that study if it hasn't been done. Maybe it's been done and I'm not aware of it, but I'm
Uh,
not aware of that study having been done.
can I ask you a slight follow-up questions to his question? If
Yeah.
it's not this that was studied under the data that you're saying does exist, what was studied then? I would think that there's no other way to test but to actually give people another eye test if they have blurry vision, no?
Well, so there's a number of lines of evidence. So some of it comes from anecdotal evidence, people describing, high acuity vision, and some of it comes from animal data. So observing the actual way that neurons behave. So neural recording neural activity directly from the cortex of animals, and then seeing how it affects surround inhibition, how it affects the way that neurons mutually inhibit each other. And so I'm drawing a connection between them basically. But as far as I'm aware, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, there hasn't been that study where someone is given psilocybin and then their vision tested, before and after. And it's such a simple thing to do actually. I'd like
Exactly.
to see that done. Because Terence McKenna always said that psilocybin would have been useful for hunting, because back in our ancestral period it would have been, animals or hominids that consumed mushrooms would have an advantage, in that they would have higher visual acuity, and they would be better equipped or better able to target their prey, and that's a cool idea. But is it real? I don't know, and I'd like to see that. It would be a very interesting effect if you found that you could improve your vision temporarily, at least, by smoking a bit of DMT. And then the second part of your question was about, yes, feeling better. Yes, again, many people experience that. That's obviously an entire field of research and clinical studies now on the effects of psychedelics on mood. Many people describe feeling their depression lifted, or anxiety levels lifted. They feel lighter. They feel like their mood is brighter for whether several days or even weeks after the experience. So again, you're doing everything right, I think, BB. Everything is kind of working as expected. Okay, so I'm going to now. What did I say? Entropy Labs. So I'm writing these down in the order in which I see them. So then there's Stephen Bennick there. I've got Apollo already made. Okay, so BB we've done. So I'm going then with Entropy Labs. You are now speakable. There we go.
So I read a paper by David Olson and Brian Ross last year titled "The Neurobasis for Psychedelic Action," and they outline kind of what happens after the molecule docks to the protein, or to the receptor, and they talk about kind of the signaling firing, and specifically in 5-HT2A, it seems like it's making it more excitable, or at least it's lowering the threshold for firing. And so from that, I was inspired to essentially take a computer vision neural network and start changing kind of the activation functions. And so I would give it an image and see what it would classify it as. And when you change these activation functions, you get very distorted predictions. And when I peered under the hood, it seems like there were very distorted images or filters. And so although our vision is not a neural network, I kind of thought, well, maybe it's a good approximation to see kind of how a neural network processes visual information. But when I was playing with different computer vision models, they all had very different outcomes. And I kind of thought, well, when we see, information or phenomenon, why do we have this expectation that we should all be seeing the same thing when our training weights or our neural networks are also finely tuned on our own life experiences? And so this kind of resulted in me kind of letting go of this concept, well, are we all seeing the same code? Because I've realized when people talk about machine elves or the girl with purple hair, the jester, the joker, whatever, we don't have this high bar of, well, is it the same joker? Is he wearing the same hat? Is he wearing the same clothes? Is he dancing? We kind of have this sense of, well, we allow this kind of variability in describing these phenomenon, and So when Danny Jones described seeing a billion dicks, or Danny describes seeing katakana, or some of the people describe seeing Sanskrit or Hebrew. Should we allow for this variation within the experience if we truly are neural networks that are all operating on distorted weights and activation functions?
Okay,
It's a good
I'll
question.
start. Um, yes, I mean, of course, and that applies to, you're right, applies to DMT imagery, is that, yes, when someone says, I see a machine elf, are they seeing exactly the same kind of machine elf as someone else? We don't know, and that is the problem. That's the problem with all DMT imagery is how do we extract this common data? How do we extract what is common between them? How do we extract data that does tell us that we're dealing with something that's external to the brain? Of course, we can never know everyone's seeing exactly the same thing, and I'm certainly not saying it would be extremely helpful if we're going to kind of distinguish this code from other DMT imagery in some way, if people were seeing exactly the same code, exactly the same structures, because that would make it much simpler then to actually show um, that people are seeing the same thing. But of course, yes, it's not a. I'm not. We're not setting a particularly high bar. We're not setting any kind of bar that's any higher than what I apply to all DMT imagery, which is what can we extract from it that tells us that it is more than just um, entirely subjectively constructed, internally generated imagery, and that's the whole problem with all DMT imagery, and that's and in my work what I try to do is to look at which aspects of the DMT phenomenology are very difficult to explain as internally generated imagery, and I do that by referring to what we known limitations or apparent limitations in the brain's world modeling abilities, and and I would apply the same approach to the code. Is what aspects are there of the code that mitigate against it being entirely internally generated, and that's where so far I think we have a that's the first major obstacle that we need to get over, is distinguishing it from internally generated imagery, and that applies to all DMT imagery. Does that make any sense, Danny?
No, it does, and I think that even the fact that we now know that you can see it on different tryptamines to different degrees, but it seems to be the same structure. Even that, even though it seems to be to some people, it would lend more credence to the fact that, well, you see this on different substances, but you can also say, well, that it's something about what tryptamines do in the brain that's also a possibility, right? The broader the spectrum of the things we try it with under the different conditions, if it still converges to the same thing, it does get you closer to something at least fundamental happening in the more and more fundamental happening in the brain, because it's encompassed by more and more angles of perception. But outside of that, I think ultimately the only way to truly discern is if you run a test that, I mean, to me, it will always be that, which is like, can you do something quote unquote physical with it? Like, if you can do that, or you can discern a message that you can now do something you couldn't do before without it. I mean, that's the holy grail. That's where it becomes fully fledged, belonging in the space of what we call real. Some of the ideas I would love to explore, if and when we do this again at some point, it would be fun to also involve Andres, actually, I can ask, because some of his ideas about hyperbolic topology might be actually very helpful here. And some of his ideas with, I spoke to him about this with the liquid crystals and stuff. It wasn't fully clear to me how he thinks about that, but it would be fun to explore his sets of expertise in one of these as well.
Okay. Um, Next, we will go to Apollo. Apollo, you can now speak.
He sounded like
You are muted.
he sounded like Agent Smith. Tell me, Mr. Anderson, what good is a phone call if you're unable to speak?
Hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Cool. Big fan of your work, Andrew.
Thank you.
This first question might just be a bust, but because you talk about sort of the development of children's brains and like reasoning, are there any written accounts across different cultures? I imagine someone must have given ayahuasca or some snuff to a child. Is that anything that you're aware of?
As far as I'm aware, yes, people have given ayahuasca to children. Certain indigenous groups, it is given to children from a very young age. However, as far as I'm aware, there have been no studies of the phenomenology of the ayahuasca state comparing children to adults. I kind of know exactly where you're going with this. Um, why that hasn't been done, I don't know. Whether there are ethical issues with it, of I don't know. But yeah, I think that would be interesting to see. Are the imagery is the type of imagery experienced by children different to that experienced by adults? And we can't do that in a Western laboratory. Of course, we can't give ayahuasca or DMT to children, but you might be able to draw upon that small number. Perhaps I don't think it's all groups that do that, but those small number of groups that do give ayahuasca to children, to actually interview these children and say, what did you see? I think that would be very interesting, minimally.
Yeah, always limited by ethics, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if I can ask you another question, you frequently, refer to DMT as a technology, even though it's sort of naturally occurring. Do you think that um, maybe it's been like co-opted by a higher intelligence in a similar way that humans sort of co-opted radio waves at a certain frequency, where we can like adjust their amplitude and frequency to, send information wirelessly? Do you think it's something like that, or do you think it's more of I guess it's like, is DMT intentionally used to distribute this information, or does it just sort of happen to disturb the brain in such a way that it's now receptive to this, lesser available information realm?
It's a very good question. Obviously, I can't answer that definitively, but some people have said that DMT is, implanted in some way in our reality for that purpose. That's possible. That's a slightly more far out explanation. I think what you're suggesting is closer to what I think is more likely. Is that, as you say, that these intelligences have co-opted, or they have realized that this particular widely um, widespread and ubiquitous molecule um, is, particularly good. That there could be something about the neural state generated by DMT that makes it easier for them. It creates a better canvas, if you like. I see our brain more as like the stage upon which these intelligences work, and DMT does generate this highly fluid and dynamic neural state very, very efficiently. You can obviously psilocybin as well at high doses. People often have encounters with very advanced beings. I don't think I'm not a pure DMT exceptionalist in that way, but I just think that DMT is the most efficient means of generating this highly fluid and dynamic and sensitive and vulnerable, in a sense, neural state. Um, but that doesn't necessarily answer the question as to why the DMT, which is so ubiquitous, it is the simplest, is by far the most commonly naturally occurring molecule, just happens to be the one that generates this such reliable entity encounters. Is there some deeper truth there, something deeper going on? Is this an implanted technology, or is it, as you suggest, perhaps more likely, that this is what these entities have chosen? Is this just the neural state that allows them best access, and most efficient access, and the type of neural activity where they the brain is in just that kind of state of just being malleable enough. It's just dynamic enough that they can really get to work on it and take control and play. You know, it seems often that they are that in the presence of DMT, they're having a field day with our brain. It's like, yes, this is the perfect state that where I can really get to work on this and really show you some incredible things. It's like the most malleable and fluid kind of state. So, you know, in short, I don't know the answer to your question. I think both are possible, or there could be other explanations as well. But yeah, it's a cool idea. I like it.
I have a question for you. Is that true that we don't know of any actual metabolic reason for DMT to be produced naturally in the body? Like we don't know of any actual function?
No, I mean, we know, well, I mean, there are studies that show now that DMT does protect neurons in conditions of hypoxia by binding to the sigma 1 receptor, which is a completely different type of receptor, and protects neurons under hypoxic stress. And so it could be the body's last ditch attempt to protect the brain during the dying process. I mean, this is a cool idea, but that doesn't explain why it also grants access by a completely different receptor system, the 5-HT2A and other serotonin receptors, why it also grants access to these strange worlds. And one can't help thinking there might be a connection there, and that during the dying process, your brain is being protected by its interaction with the 5-HT2A receptor, whilst also giving you access to perhaps what happens after we die. I mean, that's the Strassman model basically brought in the sort of a neo-Strassmanism, if you like, bringing his 1990s hypothesis, you know, his pineal hypothesis, of bringing that into the 21st century. Perhaps he was right all along in some way, and that DMT has this dual function, both to protect the brain so it's still functioning, because it's quite important, or very important, whilst also allowing you to access these realms and perhaps your consciousness to transition perhaps into whatever the great hereafter. I don't know.
The channel is being stabilized by DMT. That's interesting.
Right.
Who's next?
New next we have I can't read my own writing. Stefan Benich or Benich, I don't know. Stephen, yeah, Stephen. Stephen, you're on. But you're muted.
Uh, he he wasn't muted, and then
There you go. There, hello.
Yes, I had a question here.
Hmm.
If you assume we live in a quantum mechanical holographic universe
Okay.
that is operating like in like a Mendelbot fractal kind of thing, are these symbols potentially not us viewing the boundary limits of like say like a video game that we can consciously perceive through even though our physicality can't move through?
oh, that was the question. Yeah, it's very possible. I actually think that it's a much more likely scenario. To anybody who doesn't know, just a quick recapitulation of the holographic principle is that at least Leonard Susskind's contribution to it is that the entire universe and its content is basically a projection, a three-dimensional projection from a two-dimensional filament outside of the observable universe somewhere, which is very similar to how black holes are currently postulated to be operating. So you know all the event horizon basically has all the content that ever fell into the black hole kind of smeared on the event horizon in a two-dimensional infinite filament. So technically, if you could if you knew how, you could reconstruct all the everything that ever fell into the black hole, and this is how information is not destroyed, Hawking radiation, all that good stuff. So this is what gave the rise to some ideas that you know we in fact are in this enormous black hole, and then kind of the vectors flip, and it's not clear if you're falling towards an infinite center or the infinity of the distance is receding back from you. It's kind of hard to discern. Even though I spoke to a physicist, and he told me that there are key differences between how those two would appear, but this is just the holographic principle in general. Um, to me, it makes more sense that whatever the boundary is on which from which it is postulated we're projected from would not be external to us in the directions that we understand. It would be in some orthogonal space or a fourth dimensional direction that we can't quite get our minds around. But I would imagine that the boundary would be there. One of the things I'm currently proposing, which is on the one hand sounds like a very out there idea, but it is testable, which is that I think that in a setup of a hologram, our consciousness is the reference light, the thing that is measuring the phase. And if we can change the angle on that, we should be able to see if this idea is just a fun metaphor or if it actually holds water. Because if in fact we realize what constitutes the change of an angle of the reference light, our conscious awareness, in the holographic arrangement, you should see a departure that is very predictable in terms of what you would see happening. Um, so to your question about the code, I do actually think that if it is real of the flavor of the first kind that Andrew kindly outlined, so like real in function, not just in somebody's trying to communicate something to you on the screen, then yes, I would expect it to be as close to us as every point in space. You know, kind of like sometimes when physicists talk very mystically about M theory, they like to say that the 11th dimension is infinitely long and closer to you than your clothes. You know, it's kind of like this fun thing that they use to illustrate something very mysterious and fun. And I think, but that would be something like that. So you would have some fourth direction, physical direction, where the boundary is, and then every projection of everything that we are would be from that boundary. And by the way, it would map perfectly on what the situation is, because just like if you look at a hologram from the outside, the three-dimensional part of it is implied. It's not three-dimensional. It's two-dimensional uh, image that looks three-dimensional. So the third dimension is implied. It's not functional. You can't move in three-dimensional in dimensions. You can only see them. In the same way, it's possible that we are a four-dimensional hologram, actually not a three-dimensional one, and in that the fourth is implied. We have 3 degrees of freedom. The fourth is time. So it's possible that the process of time is actually the implied direction in the hologram, and that it's slightly different than what the classical holographic principle states. But all of that, the difference between saying all of these, neat things and what needs to be done if we want to really know is a lot of very heavy lifting in terms of theory, backed up by many, many experiments. And I do think that some of that might yield fruit, but I don't really know.
Because you have to just imagine a system that's outside of the known universe itself that's somehow operating or creating it, which seems unfeasible. But now that we're diving more into like Planck energy and things like that, the speed of light barrier, a lot of physicists are kind of not balking at it anymore, when they're discussing UAPs and other things. This whole speed of light and traveling to stars and quantum entanglement, it seems like everything is happening all at once. Like space-time distance doesn't seem to be this giant impossibility in physics anymore for going from galaxy to galaxy, whether consciously, firmly, or otherwise.
Yeah, again, all of these are very fair ideas. The short answer that would encapsulate a lot of these kind of like, out there claims that might be or might not be true is that ultimately, because there's so much information available for everybody right now, and because everybody's chat GPT is telling them they're awesome, it's almost like everybody now suffer of some degree of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and not in a mean or bad way. Like we all kind of like, I think all of us to some degree are being deluded that things are simpler than they appear to be talked about by experts, and then we say, "Oh, that was it. I can understand that." Not understanding that what experts say in open source outlets is kind of the tail end of decades of deep, deep, deep understanding, and this is something that very often is not appreciated by people. And I think that, and so what I mean by that, to your point, is that I agree with you that everything you said actually sounds like it might track for me personally, but I also understand that if we want to execute it in any reasonable way, I have a friend. I'll show you a very short anecdote, and then we'll. I have a friend who recently wrote like kind of like this outline of what he thinks might be the theory of everything, And then he kind of voiced it to me and said, well, first of all, just so you know, I mean, it's super impressive that you arrived at it by yourself. You never had contact with it. But the truth is that all of these ideas were already voiced in the physics community. What you would what you would be required to do if you're actually going to propose this seriously to the physics community is not that, hey, did you guys think about that maybe this is how it's constructed? What you would be expected to do is to come up with exact numbers for all of the stuff you're saying. So it's like, maybe this field is doing this. Okay, to what degree? Is it exactly like the what Einstein postulated as the astronomical constant? Is it more like what we see as the exponential growth of what we call dark energy as expanding out? Like, what are the exact values of the thing you're saying? How does it match with everything else? Because there's so many concepts here, right? People throw these concepts, quantum and Planck scale, but these things have numbers attached to them. And if unless the numbers really align perfectly through the entire theory, well, then just doesn't work. And that's the amount of scrutiny that is required to actually do the work. But the short answer is, yeah, it sounds everything you're saying to me personally, Danny. It tracks. Like it's possible that that's in fact the case.
Because if we can make mini black holes like Einstein Rosenthal bridges, which are just like, which are apparently, before we only thought black holes could make, if we can make tiny ones, then we can like formulate simulations in which things will happen, beyond the speed of light. So, the speed of light thing is no longer really a barrier to our philosophy or understanding of physics. This whole notion that, to accelerate a mass, at the speed of light, energy requirements become infinite. This is being disproven just based on what we're seeing with UAPs and plasma bulbs that seem to be able to defy the laws of physics. So we know something is doing it.
Or something is deluding us to think that it's doing it. Yeah, but so so it's like
It's either physics or something is actually going on that like we're seeing a shift in a lot of physicists. If you notice in interviews, they're not set in stone on the speed of light, which is interesting. And how can you live in a medium where the speed of light is 3.0 times 10 to the 6 meters per second when we know there are infinite scales throughout, everything in reality, more or less.
well, we know. So, in fairness of time for others as well, I would urge you to come to one of my lives. I'm doing them every day, and we can discuss this a lot deeper. But the short answer to this is yes. Nothing that you said really kind of goes against the grain of what I think might be possible. The only thing is, it has to be more. It's not that we know nothing. The fact that we're doing this right now tells you that we know quite a bit in terms of the specifics of how things work and execute and how light works. These things are not nothing. Like people in the habit now of berating the Big Bang Theory because that's what's in vogue right now to do. But the truth is that even that, like, listen, it's based on a lot of observations. Yes, it's an incomplete picture for sure, and some of it is to some degree naive, but it tracks in a lot of ways, and that should not be forgotten either.
Okay, I think we should. Yeah, we can go on forever
Yeah.
on physics, but
Thank you.
okay, thank
You
you,
guys, Stephen.
Stephen.
Yeah, come to
Okay,
my
so
lives. Then go thoughts. Let's continue.
so I kind of need to leave fairly soon. So I've got
Cool.
two people I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask Cameron, and then I'm going to ask Vale, and then I'm going to have to
So
say
before
say
you
my
do, let me
goodbyes.
see
So
if I can
yeah,
fold what we'll do in fairness to some people in the chat. I'm gonna go while they're asking. I'm gonna go through some of the questions and the
yeah,
ones that I think you can answer relatively quickly. I'll maybe ask you two or
okay,
three of them in my way, and then we can proceed and we can adjourn. Sorry.
okay. So I'm going to introduce Cameron next. Please try and be succinct, rather than a long exposition. Cameron.
George Amy mentioned you in a book, I think.
Sorry, Cameron.
You gotta mute,
Yes.
Stefan. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I can hear you, Cameron.
Incredible work and these days. Wonderful to hear everything going on. I just had a quick question, and forgive me if this was brought up before, because I was sort of in and out of the space. But I wonder if there's been any sort of exploration with the extended DMTX people, and like what Dan is sort of experiencing and using in terms of like external stimulus, and look into some of the strange stuff.
So the short answer is not yet. So for those that aren't aware, I'm working with a couple of companies. I'm working with New Nautics, this non-profit out of Florida. People can go to newnautics.org for more information on that, and with a new retreat and research center that's being developed in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the Caribbean. This is called Eleusis, it will be called. It's still in the early stages, so it's still being kind of built out and developed. So again, people can go to Eleusis Mind, ELEUSIS mind.com for more information about that. And we do have a special license from the government in St. Vincent to use DMT, particularly DMTX is kind of going to be the kind of the flagship program, and it will be both a research center and a retreat center. So the aim being to both allow the public or anyone who wants to experience DMTX to come and experience DMTX in a beautiful setting with all the proper preparation and integration and all that kind of stuff, but also to spearhead research projects based around DMT. So could that involve this Danny's work with this laser code effect? Yes, why not? It hasn't been done yet, but it would be an ideal setting, a very controlled setting that's outside of the normal institutions that might not want to get involved in that kind of far out stuff. Amongst many other kind of projects that often fall on the fringes of psychedelic research, but are more aligned with my interests. So the short answer is not yet, but certainly it's conceivable in the future once this whole retreat center, research center is set up, but that might not be for another few months at least. So watch this space is all I can say.
I do have just so you know, I do have
Go
two
on.
questions for you from
Sorry.
the yeah. So okay, everybody can hear me. If you can just mute Cameron so that way we don't hear ourselves
Yeah,
twice.
yeah.
Awesome. So a
Okay.
couple of questions from the chat, and then we'll do one final person from X if Andrew still has a couple of minutes. So this one is a quick one. I think I know what your answer is going to be, but Ione is asking, would you describe these entities and realms as physically real, non-physical, but objectively real, like the electromagnetic fields, or something entirely beyond current physical models?
The short answer is okay. Short answer is I don't know. I've considered both possibilities in the book. I consider the closest. I talk about the idea of post-biological intelligences, intelligence that have instantiated themselves within the deepest structure of space-time. These kind of omega minus type intelligences. That's quite physicalist. It's an extrapolation of current thinking about how intelligence beings, civilizations that emerge within our universe, how they might progress beyond. So that's one possibility. I'm not wedded to it, but I'm also open to the idea that we could indeed be dealing with something that is simply beyond our comprehension. This is why I always speak in very, very neutral terms. I don't say aliens, although that's what people always put on the YouTube videos is, neuroscientist says that DMT allows you to communicate with aliens, stop the presses. But I never ever say that. I always refer to them in rather boring terms as intelligent agents. Is this artificial intelligence of some kind? Are these other conscious intelligences? Are they not conscious? Is it some kind of weird recording? I don't know. Is the answer? I'm open to all possibilities, and I'm certainly not wedded to any of them. I would never try and convince someone that I know anything about these intelligences, because I don't. But I do think we are interacting with some kind of intelligent agent. But I don't know the form, I don't know the nature, I don't know the origin, I don't know how it relates to our universe, whether it's completely orthogonal, operating in some completely different reality, or whether it's part of some larger structure to which we normally don't have access. all open questions, Danny.
Okay, one final question for Andrew from the chat, because the other ones, guys, I think I can answer to some degree. So this one I think is for definitely for Andrew. Earlier you
Okay.
spoke how with high accuracy, okay, able to identify individual minds seeing a dog. How slash what was determining factors to measure if everyone mind maps image of a dog differently? I think your answer was that that's exactly the challenge, right?
Right. Yeah, I
So
mean, we you know, we call reality consensus reality because there is some kind of consensus that when I'm pointing at something, say, look at that, and you say, oh yeah, it's a dog, and I say, yes, that's a dog, and I can describe it. I can describe the sense. I can, to some extent, to a very good extent, I can describe exactly what I'm looking at and the details and the form and the colors and all this kind of stuff, and we agree. You know, and that's a very not a particularly fine-grained explanation. There are other things you can draw on as well in terms of measurements. I can measure the color of its fur, you know, the frequency of light that is reflected off it, and all this kind of stuff. But we can never know that we're all seeing exactly the same thing, and yet it appears that our consciousness, our brain, converges on the same kind of model, and that makes sense because the world model is an adaptive model. Our brain evolved to construct this model of the environment. That's this interface that we have with the environment, as Donald Hoffman would call it. You know, we only ever see the interface, and yet this interface appears to be it's adaptive. It does what it's supposed to do. It allows us to interact with the environment in some way. It allows us to make judicious decisions about how to behave within the environment, to survive and not to get eaten, or how to, you know, and to find a mate and reproduce. All of that works, but we can never know that we're seeing the world as it is, nor can we ever know that we're all seeing that my green is the same as your green or whatever. And to a certain extent, that doesn't really matter as long as the model is functional. And it seems that for the model to be functional, it seems to converge on a particular way of modeling the world. And so we can assume to a certain extent without actually ever knowing that we're kind of seeing the world in kind of the same way, even though that's a very vague way of putting it. um, Sorry if that didn't answer the question, but
no, I think you did. Thank you. That was more. I think the answer
yeah,
is yeah. That's the challenge. We don't know how
yeah,
to
we
differentiate
don't
that.
know. Yeah.
Okay, final question, I guess, from X, and then we'll.
Well, I've still got Vale. Who I should give.
Yeah.
I'll give the floor to Vale. This will be the final speaker, and then if you have another question, Danny, we can finish on that.
Okay.
So
Cool.
Vale, you are now speakable. There we go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, my question is about synesthesia. I have a condition called synesthesia. So I see every letter in the alphabet as having a specific color. I also see it on numbers. I also see it on keys of the piano. I can spell names in color. It's something that I have all the time. I've actually never taken psychedelic of any kind. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what effect DMT might have on that. If you have looked at any research into synesthesia or how DMT might affect synesthesia, also in context of the code. Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Vale. Well, we know. So synesthesia. I'm not an expert. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on synesthesia, but it's a well-studied phenomenon, and people under the influence of psychedelics do experience effects that are comparable to synesthesia. And you can imagine, for example, that, you know, when your brain constructs your model of the world, it kind of parcellates. There's a difference between, let's say, the form of a an apple or something and its color. You know, it's all unified, and yet the green and redness of the apple is somehow attached to that particular form, even though the color is represented in a different area of the cortex than the actual form itself. And this is kind of an interesting problem in neuroscience, often called, you know, the binding problem. How is the color how is the red color of the apple attached to the form of the apple, and separated from the red color of some other, the bus or whatever, and how is this all unified together? And the brain is, the cortex is always, is highly interconnected, and different areas of the cortex are always speaking to each other, sharing information, and this unification seems to emerge at this higher level, and yet somehow redness is kept separate. When I see the redness of an apple, it's somehow kept separate from other objects that don't appear red, that appear green or blue or whatever. And so one can imagine with psychedelics is that we know that under the influence of psychedelics, neurons become more excitable, they share information more freely, you see greater connectivity. And so one can imagine that under the influence of psychedelics, since information is flowing more freely, and more parts of the brain are becoming connected and speaking to each other, that you might start to see kind of bleed through where color starts to be associated with objects and forms that aren't normally associated with a color. So you see someone's name, and somehow that it seems red, even though it's not colored red. And one can imagine that emerges from greater communication between areas of the brain that represent color information and areas of the brain that represent the forms of letters and names. And the same with when people hear sounds and say, oh, this sound seems bright blue somehow. Again, one can imagine greater communication between areas of the brain that are representing sound information and auditory information, the sound of the world, and areas of the brain that are normally kept well separate. Those are the parts of the brain that are representing color information, visual color information. And so you can at least at a high level, one can envisage how synesthesia might emerge in your brain, for example. I don't know if you've ever had a neuroimaging done, but they might see that when you are seeing someone's name, let's say, that as well as the area of the kind of lexical areas of the brain that represent lexical information, such as letters and numbers, etc., all are not only those areas of the brain active, but also areas of the brain that normally would be quiet, that represent color information. And so that's how I would imagine it, and that might be facilitated by psychedelics as well, which is why people describe synesthesia type effects under the influence of psychedelics. So getting to your question, what would be the effect of you under the influence of DMT? Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know. Would it enhance your synesthesia? Would it disrupt it? It's impossible to say without putting some psychedelic molecules into your brain and asking you, I'm afraid, and measuring your brain activity, and that would be very interesting. So if you're willing to do that, and there's someone who's studying synesthesia, then you'd be an ideal subject for that kind of thing.
It would be interesting to study it under people with different, you know, issues. Well, maybe not issues, maybe gifts, however you want to define it, and to see what the code appears as. I think it will give us some information. One of the individuals I mentioned to you is the one that seems to be. I know you told me the word immune is the wrong word, but he can't experience at least the visuals of DMT. And he could see the code perfectly well. Now, this doesn't put any final nail in the coffin of an argument for me, but it definitely tells you something about what this might be with the, you know, with the. We're gonna involve some brain scans with it soon, and to see if there's any differentiation between how he perceives it and other people perceive it. One final question from the chat. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew. What is the Rosetta Stone? What if the Rosetta wait, okay, it jumped on me. Can't ask you about beings because that usage. Where was that question? Oh, that's a question more generally. Okay, what if the Rosetta Stone is based on frequency modulation and the key is in the birds AM versus FM? Oh man, guys, stop. AM versus MM modulation skills, and WASP's issue with cellular radio. So are you essentially asking, Jessica, if it's just different frequencies available to us and we're just changing frequencies with these substances? Because if so, I think Andrews, I think you would. The answer would be, yeah, maybe. Like, right? Or it's just a kind of. I guess that's
Yeah.
kind of referring to the questions that somebody already asked, which is it just opening and then the brain makes the discerning, or is there something in the channel that is also doing discerning for you? Like it switches between, like almost like intelligently guiding you through the process.
Yeah, I think the once you start talking about frequency, you get into often misunderstandings, and I think people take this analogy of changing the frequency of the brain. You know, what do people actually mean by that? And they're taking this kind of radio analogy a little bit too far. Um, because when people say you're changing the frequency of what? The brain isn't operating on like a single frequency. There's lots of frequencies of electromagnetic signals being generated by the brain all the time that we can detect. But I don't think it's as simple as that. I don't think it's as simple as, oh, you change the frequency of the brain. It's not quite, but as an analogy, it works really well, and I often use that as it's like changing the frequency of the radio set and allowing another channel to come through. But I don't think it's as simple as changing the frequency of the brain. But I do think, yes, that you are somehow allowing in the same way that when you change the channel on the radio, you're allowing a different source of information or a different pattern of information to be picked up by the radio in the same way or in a similar way, analogous way. In the presence of DMT, you're allowing the brain access to, or allowing some intelligent agent to gain access to and direct information through it. So I don't think it's a picking up of a different frequency necessarily, but rather you're creating the neural state, the particular conditions that allows these intelligent agents to actually direct information into the brain. So it's more of a directed process, in my opinion, than a radio set, which is simply the radio picking up a new frequency. I think it's more like the information is being directed into the brain, and actually they're directing the visions, they're directing the reconfiguration of this world model that's being constructed. They're commandeering, as I always say, your brain's world building machinery.
Awesome. All right, I think that was wonderful. I think we've
Wonderful.
arrived at the end of this great conversation. Any final words? Well, obviously, everybody I highly recommend. First of all, to like the live. If you go on the live and you didn't like it yet, that's not okay. You should like the live. The algorithms love that. Secondly, go if you haven't already, go pick up Andrew's new book, Death by Astonishment.
Yes.
I'm in the process of it. It's really wonderful. Yep.
Brilliant.
And next time we're doing it, we should also do it in between a little bit, just to flash it out. But yeah, it is really you're really wonderful writer, and I have to give you a compliment. I do see your evolution as a writer, which is very interesting to watch because your writing is compelling, but there's a cadence that I think you found in this book that previously wasn't as pronounced. There's quite a bit of writing growth there, so it's very encouraging to see as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Any final words, Andrew?
No, well, thank you for this conversation. It's always good. I think the problem we often have is that people hear you say something and on one channel, and then people hear me say something, and then they kind of come to conclusions about what I think, or they don't listen. I think often they hear me say one thing that's kind of pushing back, and they go, "Oh, he's a hater. He's dismissing," and it's like,
Cosmo.
just fucking listen to what I'm saying, and you'll find out that I'm not dismissing anything. I'm just offering honest critiques and ideas and responses, reactions, and as people hopefully now, if they listen to all of this, they see that we have a perfectly open communication channel. We're not enemies. We're not in competition. We actually agree on probably 98% of things. Broadly in terms of how we interpret DMT. We're allies. In this big grand struggle this great mystery of what DMT represents, and we're kind of working together in many ways to try and understand it. And it involves back and forth. It involves things we agree on, things we disagree on, points of where we converge, points where we diverge, points where we then reconverge. All this kind of stuff goes on all the time, and it's very healthy. It's perfectly natural, and people should appreciate that. And so I think, from both sides, you get people telling me that I'm a fucking hater and that, I'm dismissing, and then people from your side saying, oh, he's a complete lunatic and this is all bullshit and he's a grifter, and we both get it. We both get the positive and the negative, and it's not particularly helpful, I think. So, let's try and keep it civil and respectable, and as we do always. I would suggest that others try and do the same,
I
because that's how we make progress and how we learn and how we make,
Yeah,
that's it.
I couldn't agree more. And just one very obvious thing to point out: in a friendly conversation, you don't have to always agree. That's the whole point of
No.
the
What's the
conversation.
point of the conversation if we're agreeing? That's just an echo
Yeah, it's
chamber.
exactly. And also, as Nico,
Yeah.
a good friend who also asked you a question today. Okay, well, I'll take you in a moment. He said, you made it when a when a McKenna called called you nuts. It's so fun. You know how long I laughed? It was amazing. It was like he said, so "What about this Daddy Goler fella? Do you think he's onto something, or is he completely nuts?" And I go, and I immediately go, "Wait, those are not mutually exclusive." It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, of course, I take it with great humor. It was actually very funny. Cosmo, stop destroying everything. My dog is going crazy. I gotta take him. Andrew,
Okay,
thank you
that's
so
the
much,
sign
brother.
then.
Yeah, thank you,
Okay.
Andrew. Thank you so much
All
for
right.
everything, and
Okay.
we'll be talking.
All right. So we're going to end the X now. Thank you everyone for listening.
Yep.
And I will end this now. So bye bye, X people.
Wait,
Thank you.
but don't hang up on Riverside because I'm gonna stop the recording now
No.
and then let it